Good morning, everyone. For today's devotion, I would like to share from 1 Samuel chapter 30. And the reason why I'm sharing this is after my dad's bypass surgery, when I went to meet him, the first thing that he did when he opened his eyes was share from this. And it made me think a lot about this particular incident. And the background of the story is David and his men, 600 fighting men, are returning back to Ziklag after they have been sent back by the Philistines. And when they come back to Ziklag, maybe on the way to Ziklag they must be rejoicing, or they might have been a little bit happy that they are not in a tight position to fight against the Israelites. But upon reaching Ziklag, they find it burnt. They find their families missing, their livestock missing, everything missing. And in verse 4 we read that they wept a lot till they had no strength to weep. So that was the pain and agony they had. And they didn't know what happened to their families. They had no idea whether their children and wives were alive and where they were and how they were. And so much of things were going on in their mind. So at this moment they just weep. They've lost all their strength, their hope. And but when we look at David, we see that he too cries, he too weeps because he has lost both his wives, and he is also clueless as to what to do and how to proceed from now on. And we read in verse 6 that David is distressed because the men were talking of stoning him. These very men who trusted David that he will become the king, and who are willing to lay down their lives for David. These very men who had put their hope on David, and these very men, very strong and brave fighting men of David, his right and left hand, were thinking of stoning him. And at this moment, when everything, David himself had lost his family, he himself is feeling distressed, he is troubled and is hopeless. And at this very moment, the only men who had given him company when he escaped from Saul, they too turned against him. And at this moment, we find David pulling himself together. And in verse 6, it says, though he was distressed, but David found strength in the Lord his God. So in another version it says David encouraged himself in the Lord. So how could he do that? So David was not an occasional visitor to God, or he was not a person who prayed very rarely or whenever his need arose, but he was a person who worshipped God. He was a person who had a very intimate relationship with God. He worshipped God all the time, and God was his everything. And if we read through the Psalms of David, we find the love and the adoration that he had for God. And in Psalm chapter 16 verse 2 it says, I said to the Lord, you are my Lord, apart from you I have no good thing. That was the relationship of David with God. Apart from God, he had absolutely nothing. God was his everything. And that's when he pulls himself. He is able to say, God is my strength, my shield, my fortress. And then we go on to read in verse 7, he inquires of the Lord. He asks God, what am I to do next? Should I pursue them? And what's the next step I have to do? Okay, I've lost my wife, I've lost the children, the livestock, everything. But next, what am I supposed to do? And God doesn't leave him just like that. God answers him. And after God tells him what to do, David just does not sit down and again weep or just mumbles or grumbles, but he sets in actions and he proceeds to do what God had asked him to do. God had told him to pursue them, and God had given him the assurance that he will succeed in the rescue. And though David was weak, tired, his men were disappointed. They too were tired and weak, and they were helpless. But they decided to move on. And go on to read that out of 600 men, only 400 men could go with David to fight. But David went ahead, and we see that we go on to read that when in verse 11 that they find a Philistine, and God had kept a Philistine there to lead David to the Amalekites. God did not just send him out and said, just go find your way on your own. But God knew what he needed. God knew that David would need someone to lead him to the Amalekites, and God prepared an Egyptian slave. God made that person sick, and that person finally led David to the Amalekites. And when David went to the Amalekites, we see that David fought the Amalekites from the dusk to the next evening. And the battle was not a small battle, it was a very ferocious one. And we see that David does not spare anyone, and except for the 400 men who escaped on the camel backs, he spared none. And the victory was huge, and we know that the history was so great that for the next 300 years, Israelites had no problem from the Amalekites. They had peace from the Amalekites. And it is not only that David could get peace for the Israelites and get victory over the Amalekites, he also got back everything that he had lost. His wife, his children, his men's family, their livestock. And it was not only what they lost, they got more than what they had lost. And we see that David could give some of his plunder as gifts to the leaders in Judah. So that was the victory that God had given him. So how was this possible? Was just because David had found his strength in the Lord. And the Hebrew word for found strength is Hepzibah, which means to fasten upon, to bind, to restrain, or to conquer. And when our strength comes from the Lord, when we bind ourselves upon the Lord, we are not just an ordinary person, but we become conquerors. And that's when Paul says, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So today, where is our strength lying? How can we find our strength in the Lord, just like David? Or are we like the 600 fighting men who put their hope in David and were hopeless? So on this day, I would like to encourage you, like David, let us put our hope on God, and let us find our strength in the Lord. Thank you.
The joy of the Lord is my strength. 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 He gives me living water and I thirst no more. He gives me living water and I thirst no more. He gives me living water and I thirst no more. The joy of the Lord is my strength. The devil doesn't like it when I laugh, ha ha. The devil doesn't like it when I laugh, ha ha. The devil doesn't like it when I laugh, ha ha. The joy of the Lord is my strength.